And welcome back again, yours truly, Anthony Parker Alexander of Keeping It Honest. We don't just keep it simple, we don't just keep it real, we keep it honest. Late breaking, Kamala Harris picks her VP. He is, of course, Tim Walz. We're going to talk about him in a minute. We thank you for being on our show, for watching our show. Tell your friends. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. It's a big day. Harris has picked her VP. We're going to talk about him in a minute. We're going to give some background. If you have any questions or comments, you can email yours truly. It's parkerman2011 at gmail.com, parkerman2011 at gmail.com. You can leave me a text, voicemail, 216-702-3718, 216-702-3718. You know what? We thank you for supporting the overnight show we did, Midnight at the Oasis. We started that at 12 at night. We're going to keep doing that as best as we can, 12 at night. Midnight at the Oasis is an extension of Keeping It Honest. And what we do is we give the news of the day and give you the news for that morning. So last night, what we did, we had picked, you really wanted Mark Kelly to be the VP, presidential candidate. And we weren't looking at Tim Walz. We were, we were looking at Jason Shapiro. We were looking at him as far as being the person that Kamala would pick. So she picked Tim Walz, and we're going to talk about him. And what we try to do in this show, we try to give the left side, try to give the right side at the end of the day. Hopefully, you decide. You may not like what we do, but we do give you the truth. So hit the like and share button and subscribe and let us continue to grow and keep supporting us. So real quick, a little bit about Tim Walz. So I don't know how many of you guys know about him, but he's the governor of Minnesota, the 41st governor of Minnesota. His lieutenant is Peggy Flanagan. And before that, it was Mark Dayton, who was the governor. He got in office January 3rd, 2017. And the interesting thing about him, he's a member of the United States Representatives, of course. So he was born Timothy James Walz, April 6, 1964. He's 60-year-old. West Point, Nebraska, United States. And this is from Wikipedia, just to let you know. He has two children. His wife is Gwen Whipple. He was educated at Chardon State College and Minnesota State University. Military service. He's been in the Army. Years of service from 1981 to 2005. His rank was a Commander Sergeant Major. And his awards, Army Commendation Medal and Army Achievement Medal. So he was also a retired educator. So he was a teacher. Wow. So former teacher, kind of like Joe Biden. And he was born in West Point, Nebraska. He joined the National Army Guard, and he worked in manufacturing, and teaching after high school. So we're going to talk about a little bit about what he stands for. Now that Kamala has picked him as a running mate, what are some of the things that he stands for? And it's going to be interesting. His political, career and positions are leaning different ways. So we're going to get a backdrop of him, who he is. And while we're getting that, we're going to talk about what we're learning. All of this is fast approaching. Some people are outside his house waiting for him to come out. Other people are following a plane. other people are doing their speeches. We're going to go live to a speech that J.D. Vance is doing too, regarding him running for vice president, and also Tim Walz running for vice president, because they're going to be doing maybe a debate. So stay tuned for that. So now, who is this guy? Tim Walz. Let's find out right now.
And I am the chair of the Democratic Governors Association.
Tim Walz was born in the spring of 1964 and grew up in small-town Nebraska.
Look, I went to a high school, 400 people in the town, 24 kids in my class.
He joined the National Guard as a teenager using the GI Bill to pay tuition at Nebraska's Chadron State College. Walz would serve in the National Guard for the next 24 years. After graduating, he taught in China for a year. Then he returned to Nebraska, where he began his career as a school teacher.
So 24 years in the National Guard, that's a long time. That means he's committed, I guess, to his country.
In 1994, he married fellow school teacher Gwen Walz. They moved to Mankato in the mid-90s, where he began teaching and coaching football at Mankato West High School.
What did you love about coaching?
Oh, I think everything about it, certainly being with the kids.
His first serious venture into politics was in 2004, when he was a volunteer for John Kerry's presidential campaign. He was the first elected to Congress in 2006 for Minnesota's first congressional district. It was a big upset. He beat the Republican incumbent Gil Gutnick by more than 5 percentage points. Walz would serve in Congress for the next 12 years.
So he did Congress for 12 years, but also he served with the John Kerry campaign, or volunteered. And to me, John Kerry was one of the most boringest people to ever run for president. But I guess it gave Mr. Walz good experience.
Thing I heard from the people out here is we're going to rebuild, and they said we're not looking for handouts, we're just looking for a hand up.
He ran for governor in 2018, beating Republican Jeff Johnson by more than 11 points.
I will be your governor just as much as I will be for the people in this room.
So he barely won by 11 points. You talk about a close race. Now, what would have happened if he hadn't won? Would he have become governor? Would he have eventually got into Kamala Harris's viewpoint, where she picked him as vice president? So those 11 points really made a difference to possibly where this country may be headed.
The defining moments of his first term came in a tumultuous year, 2020. First came the COVID pandemic. Walz supported major lockdowns, with restaurants temporarily closing and schools going remote.
And I'm trying the best I can to give the data based on the science, pushing the envelope as close as I can to opening things up.
Then on May 25th, George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police. Massive demonstrations turned violent, and for 3 days, fires raged, destroying entire blocks of the Twin Cities.
This is not grieving, and this is not making a statement that we fully acknowledge needs to be fixed. This is life-threatening, dangerous.
After 3 days, Walz called in the National Guard. He would receive intense criticism for not bringing in the Guard sooner. In the fall of 2022 came the Feeding Our Future scandal. $250 million. It was the largest pandemic fraud scheme in the country. Walz would maintain his administration did everything it could once it learned of the fraud. Despite escalating criticism, Walz easily won re-election in 2022.
So that's interesting, that scandal right there. I hadn't heard about that, and I guess the Republicans are going to bring that up. But it looks like he was able to withstand that and then run again and be reelected for governor.
We're not going to see things that Minnesotans need be stalled. We're going to see things that are able to move forward.
2023 would prove a banner year for the governor. He was part of a DFL trifecta that passed a sweeping progressive agenda that included free school meals, codifying abortion rights, legalizing marijuana, enacting paid family leave, and more.
History will write the story. I keep hearing about this. What's this going to mean? Well, we'll find out. We're pretty sure it's going to mean a fairer, more inclusive, better, and more prosperous Minnesota.
So that's interesting. So legalized marijuana, school programs. Basically, he's a modern politician, which to some people they like and other people they don't like. So if you're picking him as a VP candidate, now look at him now. Is he one that, if Kamala can't do it, that he would fill in to be the next president? Would he be in between a Donald Trump or a Kamala Harris or a Joe Biden or a Dick Cheney?
Late that year, he was named chair of the Democratic Governors Association. In July of 2024, he led a delegation of Democratic governors to the White House to confront President Joe Biden over concerns about his age. Walz emerged from that meeting insisting Biden was fit enough to stay in the presidential race. Walz has been married to First Lady Gwen Walz for 30 years. They have 2 children, Hope, age 23, and Gus, age 17. Esme Murphy, WCCO News.
So there you go. That's the history of Tim Walz, who again is the VP candidate, the choice for Kamala Harris. Wow, interesting. You have any questions or comments about him, you can let me know. Email address, parkerman2011 at gmail.com, parkerman2011 at gmail.com. Telephone number, if you're interested, is 216, leave me a voicemail, 702-3718, 216-702-3718. And I'm talking to you, but also setting up everything for the next part of the show. And we're going to be talking about a couple things which it's an interesting news cycle. I am telling you, as I'm talking to you, I'm navigating everything on how to put together the next portion of the show. We're going to go back now, which is a part that I like. There's a live rally going on now, and it's with J.D. Vance. And we're going to get to hear his side as far as the Tim Walz and how does he feel about that. So you're watching Keeping It Honest with yours truly, Anthony Parker, Tim Walz, the VP pick for Kamala Harris. So now some of the political positions of Tim Walz. I'm reading this right off of Wikipedia. Cannabis. He advocated for the legislation of recreational cannabis as a governor of Minnesota. As a candidate for governor in 2017, he said, "We have an opportunity in Minnesota to replace the current failed policy with one that creates tax revenue, grows jobs, builds opportunities for Minnesotans, protects Minnesota jobs, kids, and trusts adults to make personal decisions based on their personal freedom." So he proposed the creation of the Cannabis Management Office to develop and implement the regulatory, interesting, framework for adult use cannabis. Economic issues. So during the economic crisis in 2006, he repeatedly spoke out against using taxpayer money to bail out financial institutions. How many people are for or against that? In late September, he voted against the $700 billion TARP bill, which purchased troubled access from these institutions. Try reading all that at the last minute. So that's him on economic issues. Now think of him now. He's going to be vice president with Kamala if she gets elected. Education. So he was a public school teacher for 20 years. He opposes using merit pay for teachers, voting in favor of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Okay. Guns. So while in Congress, he was a strong supporter of gun rights and was endorsed by the NRA Political Victory Fund. So he's a supporter of gun rights. Okay. LGBT rights. He supported those, including federal anti-discrimination laws on the basis of sexual orientation. The Israel-Hamas war, very controversial. So he condemned this. Okay. And are you for or against it because he condemned it? We're going through some of his political positions. Veteran issues. So he served 24 years in the Army National Guard. So you know he's for veteran issues. He's for that. Women's issues. Here we go. He supports abortion rights. Okay. So we're going to see how that affects him with women and how does that affect him with Kamala? All these issues are saying that she's for his personal life. He's married. His wife is Gwen. They married in 1994. They lived in Minnesota for nearly 20 years before moving to St. Paul with their 2 children, and he's Lutheran. His brother Craig died after being hit by a falling tree during the storm in 2019. He's survived by his wife Julie and their son Jacob, who suffered severe injuries but survived. And that's part of who Tim Walz is. You're watching Keeping It Honest with yours truly, Anthony Parker. We're talking about the VP pick. Tim Walz wasn't who I thought, but I think he might be the right choice. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go, which I like, to this live event taking place where J.D. Vance is talking, and he's going to be talking about Tim Walz being the VP pick because he's going to be debating him.
There's things to be done all over the world.
Wow. Well, it's great to be in South Philly, isn't it? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say a few brief words, and I thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to introduce some folks who have been affected by Kamala Harris's disastrous policies, because I think it's important to put a human face on the disaster that has been Kamala Harris and to remind the American people this is why we need President Donald J. Trump, because normal people benefit when he's the President of the United States. But first, let me say just a few words, and then we'll take some questions from reporters. But let me just start out by saying that Kamala Harris has been such a disaster as vice president of this country that everywhere she goes, chaos and uncertainty follow. We have got a war in Europe. We have got a war in the Middle East that threatens to spiral out of control. We've got chaos in the world financial markets. Everything that Kamala Harris touches has been a disaster, and we have got to kick her out of the United States government, not give her promotion. Now, today in particular, I've already met with some people who have really suffered because of Kamala Harris's border policies. And let's just count the ways in which our borders are open the American southern border. On day one, Kamala Harris suspended deportations. On day one, Kamala Harris stopped the Remain in Mexico policy that kept our country safe. On day one, borders are Kamala Harris. She stopped construction of the southern border wall. And on day one, she proposed amnesty for millions of illegal aliens in this country. And we know that every time Kamala Harris took an action to open the American southern border, it is families like many of those who stand behind me today who have suffered the most.
So that's going to be interesting to hear what some of these people say. So he is doing his first rally since Kamala Harris picked Mr. Forget his name now, Walz, Timothy Walz, to be her vice presidential candidate. So the interesting thing too is to see when they're going to do their debate, the VP debate. A lot of people say, oh, who cares? But this should be an interesting one. I think it's going to be toe-to-toe with Vance and also Mr. Walz. We'll stay tuned for that.
And now, for the past 2 weeks, Kamala Harris has been saying that she wants a promotion. I think we ought to say to Kamala Harris, you're fired, and rehire Donald J. Trump as President of the United States. Now, I want to get everybody's name here, but before I do, I just want to say I'm not going to be able to introduce everybody I've spoken to just this morning and early this afternoon. But you've got people who have lost loved ones just in the last few weeks to gun violence because we won't lock up violent criminals in this country anymore, thanks to the policies of Kamala Harris. You've got children who have been orphaned, who have been bouncing around foster homes because Kamala Harris's policies allow this terrible fentanyl into our country that orphan these poor kids. And you've got parents who have lost loved ones, who have lost children because we keep on allowing the Mexican drug cartels to turn our country into a drug trafficking zone. It is normal people who suffer when Kamala Harris refuses to do her job, and it is normal people who stand to benefit the most when we re-elect Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. And that's what we're going to do, right? That's exactly what we're going to do. So I want to make sure I get these names right, but I want to thank Dave Torres for being here. Great American. Amanda Navarro is here with us. We've got Jack Kilkus and we've got Terry Stark. Again, these are people whose loved ones have suffered and in some cases died because Kamala Harris doesn't do her job. And I want to invite a few people up to just give some personal testimony. And before I do, I want to say what amazing personal courage it takes to be here and to be willing to offer your personal story. I know it's not easy, and I know this is sad, heart-wrenching stuff, but the American people need to understand what are the consequences of screwing up this election. And so I appreciate you all being here very much. So first, I want to start with Denise.
So before he starts that, so some of these people are going to come up and give their heartfelt stories. So this is going to be interesting because later on today will be Kamala Harris's rally, and we're going to try to be there live too, just like we are for this one. So let's listen to some of these stories. We're keeping it honest.
Denise and Mike Trask. Trask, you guys want to come up here? Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you for having us today. Our daughter Jacqueline is the oldest of our 5 children. Jack was always a fearless, free spirit who was full of adventure and sometimes mischief. I'm proud to selfishly boast that we've raised our kids with good morals, values, and kind hearts. We are a God-loving and God-fearing family that never would have imagined we'd go through the devastation and torment of addiction. Yet here it was, directly impacting our lives. It crept right under our front door into our home and had no regard that our baby was a good girl, that our family was a grateful and prayerful unit, or even that my own husband was a Philadelphia narcotics officer. We learned fast that addiction knows no race, no religion, no economic status, and has no limits. It was devastating to endure, the most helpless thing imaginable as her parents. We tried any and everything possible. After a few years of complete hell, Jack reached her bottom. She admitted herself into an amazing program called FRAT, First Responders Addiction Treatment, at the Livingren Foundation. Jacqueline was an EMT. She got herself clean and sober, and we got our daughter back. She lived 2 beautiful years in sobriety and shared her story at numerous meetings in and around Philadelphia. She touched people when she spoke. If you were blessed to be in her company, you'd never forget her. Her heart was gold and fair and never critical. Life was amazing once again for Jack and for our family. That is until May 1st, 2016, when she had a lapse in judgment, when she had an awful trigger, and when she had tunnel vision of only one thing, and bought herself a bag of heroin that, of course, was laced with fentanyl. And our 26-year-old daughter died of an accidental overdose in her car, in a mall parking lot, in broad daylight, alone. We like to think of Jack's passing as God's way of relieving her from her pain. It helps us cope with our constant heartache and great loss. We imagine that he saw how broken she was and that he freed her from the struggles she was battling with. He took her home with him, and one day we will all be reunited with her. There's great comfort in that. Our added note here to Jacqueline's story is yes, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, pills, all of the street drugs out there are lethal in and of themselves. But the fentanyl coming right into our country, our cities, and our neighborhoods is killing thousands and thousands of people every day. It's tremendously deadly, and we're losing our loved ones at an alarming rate because of its potency and infestation into the illegal drug market. The border travesty that this current administration has neglected, allowed, and even supported is infuriating and, quite frankly, complete lunacy on multiple levels. I pray we get ahead of it. I pray our borders are secured once again. I pray for all those affected by addiction and all of its ugliness. I pray it never touches my other children who work every day as public servants for this city as a police officer and a medical professional. And lastly, I pray that our country is restored again, safe again, respected again, economically stable again, and elects our former President Donald J. Trump again, along with U.S. Senator J.D. Vance as his vice president in November. Lord, hear our prayers and let's make America great again.
And that's a sad story. It's not just a Democrat or Republican story. It's an American story. Opioids, the drugs, are killing people left and right every day. So whoever's in office, what they need to do is to stop those drugs from coming to the United States.
You're listening there to a rally, the first time Senator J.D. Vance is speaking since Vice President Kamala Harris announced her vice presidential pick. We do need to sneak in a quick two-minute break here on.
While they're talking about the break, we're letting you know that you are watching yours truly, Anthony Parker, of Keeping Honest. We don't just keep it real, we don't just keep it simple, we keep it honest. If you have any questions or comments, you can email yours truly. It's parkerman2011@gmail.com, parkerman2011@gmail.com. We're about to go back to this rally in 80 minutes. Let me know what you think about it. We saw the one family talking, very heartfelt, very sad. And we're probably going to see some more stories here, some more stories too. J.D. Vance is doing his first rally. It's the announcement of, remember his name, Timothy Walz. That's Kamala Vice Presidential Partner. It's going to make you vote more Republican or more Democratic.
Tough not to admire the courage of the two families behind me, but I have to ask, why is it necessary? Why are they suffering? And the answer is because we have a leadership that is failing them. I want to tell my own personal story here because it touches on a little bit of what they talked about. You know, I remember when my own mom struggled with addiction. They raised me for a big chunk of my early life. And I remember after one particularly bad overdose.
So this part is interesting. They always wanted him to tell his personal story to maybe get people to know him a little bit more. Let's listen in.
Sitting beside her bed and being just angry that mom had taken this stuff to begin with, but then just desperately hoping and praying, Jesus, please let her wake up from this. And that's what addiction does to our families. It sort of combines this incredible frustration, but also we still love the people who suffer and we still want them to get better, even when we're frustrated when they take a wrong turn. But what I got with my mom, who's been clean and sober for nearly 10 years now. Thank you. And hearing these stories, I almost feel guilty that I got it. But I'm so grateful that we got that second chance with my mom, because now I've got, my oldest kid is 7 years old, and the only thing that he knows about mom is that she's the best grandma a boy could ask for. And I want more of you and more of the families here in Philadelphia to get that second chance with a loved one. I want them to have another opportunity to get back on that horse and get clean, knowing that sometimes they're going to fall off the horse, but we want to give them another opportunity to get back on. I want a leadership that makes our streets safe enough where kids can make a mistake without it taking their lives from them. I want a country where our leaders put the interests of our citizens first, and I want Donald J. Trump to be back in the White House because he's the only person running who is going to do exactly that.
because it's interesting because if Donald Trump is back in, then that means J.D. Vance is in. And if you have to compare and trash these two, think about this. J.D. Vance now is getting more heartfelt, telling his grassroots story as far as drugs, opioid, and being raised by a mom that was a drug addict. Now, how much does this affect Americans across the country? It affects a lot of people. Now you have his story. Then you have Kamala's story, or Kamala's story, and her, segregation and everything. Which one is going to be the one that's going to appeal to more grassroots? Is Timothy? Is Mr. Walt's story? We don't really know a lot about him, just from what I told you a little bit in the bio that he said. How many of that is going to affect the people out there that are voting? So to me, if you're looking for people as far as heartstrings to tug, it might be J.D. Vance's story, where now he can get out to people and say, look, even though we have Trump, who's got like a lot of money, you've got me. I may have a lot now, but this is where I came from. And if I came from this, I can either help you or you can come to this. But we all have to work together. Now, would Kamala and would Timothy be able to do the same speech? I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Now, I want to say just two things here before I take some questions from the media. The first is, again, thank you all for being here. Seriously, I cannot tell you how grateful I am. We could do so much better. We could do so much better in this country with better leadership. We could give kids those second chances, and we could make sure that the next time we're here in Philadelphia, we're hearing stories of triumph and hope, of second chances successful, and not of kids who have lost their lives. We've just got to have better leadership. But the second message I want to leave you with, and this is for the media, because there are real stories to tell. There are real heartbreaks and real stories of hope and triumph.
One thing he does about the media, he tends to slam the media, saying that the media is more Democratic than Republican and that they should tell more real stories. So let's hear how he's going to say it on this time.
But there is a person who is asking, she's going to be here later today, Kamala Harris, our border czar, is asking the American people to make her the next president of the United States. And yet for 16 days and counting, the American media has been unable to ask her a question. Now, agree or disagree with me and President Trump, nobody would dispute that we will go anywhere and we will talk to anyone and we will answer any question because we will answer any question because we think we owe it to the American people to try to persuade them instead of running from them. And that's what Kamala Harris has done. She is running a basement campaign where she refuses to go before the free press and actually answer their questions. Well, what kind of an election can you have if your own presidential candidate won't actually answer tough questions?
And that part is right, because she hasn't really answered a question in the 16 days that she's been running to become president of the United States. And she's doing a rally tonight, which really won't be her giving answers to the media, but her putting it in her own slant. She's going to be controlling the narrative.
And so I'd ask the American media to show a little bit of shame and to demand that before you give Kamala Harris your endorsement, and that's what the media has done, you at least force her to answer some tough questions and to stand before the American people and persuade them. Thank you. Kamala Harris ought to stand before the American people and persuade them of why she's the right choice. She ought to answer for the fact that she wanted to ban fracking and now she allegedly doesn't. She ought to answer for the fact that she wanted to defund the police. She ought to answer for the fact that she opened up the American southern border, and she ought to answer for the fact that groceries are unaffordable and housing is unaffordable because of her policies. So to the media, please, for the love of God, do a better job. The American people demand it. Thank you all for being here. God bless you guys. I love you all. And I'm especially grateful to the folks behind me for offering testimony so people can understand what the consequences are of failed leadership. God bless you all, and thank you.
So now let's see if he's going to take questions and answers from the media himself.
All right. Calm down. We've got to give the fake news a few questions here. Though I'm sure we have hopefully a few honest journalists here in the audience. Ma'am.
And the thing is, as he called the fake news, there are some credible reporters out there. So let's not hope that if they do win, and it's Trump for president and Vance for vice president, that they don't really address the media themselves and always accuse them of doing fake news. So let's see how this goes. Right now, I don't think we can even hear what the reporters' questions are. And no, we can't. You're watching Keeping It Honest. Yours truly, Anthony Parker.
So first of all, the reason I didn't say a whole lot about Tim Walz is because the Democrats have showed a willingness to pull a little switcheroo on us. So I don't even know if we're actually going to get Tim Walz out of this campaign. And I think that a lot of us are asking ourselves, well, it's not going to be official until the Democrats actually nominate him, I guess, at their convention next week. So that's the first reason. The second reason is, look, Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far left radicals in the entire United States government at any level. But I think that what Tim Walz's selection says is that Kamala Harris has bent the knee to the far left of her party, which is what she always does. Kamala Harris listened to the Hamas wing of the party. She selected Tim Walz, a guy who wants to ship more manufacturing jobs to China, who wants to give illegal aliens driver's license, and who wants to make the fentanyl crisis that we just heard about so much worse because he refuses to do his job and actually make it easier for American citizens and not illegal aliens to live a good life. So I think what it says is that Kamala Harris is running as a San Francisco liberal. She is governed as a San Francisco liberal, and she's chosen a running mate who will be a San Francisco-style liberal. The last thing that I'll say about Tim Walz is, to her credit, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz do make an interesting team, because if we remember the rioting in the summer of 2020, Tim Walz was the guy who let rioters burn down Minneapolis, and then Kamala Harris was the one who bailed the rioters out of jail. So there's an interesting team in that sense.
Well, at least they are a team, which is interesting. So not a fan of Tim Walz. So what happened if Mark Webb would have been picked? Would J.D. Vance say some of those things about him too? The interesting thing is, when Tim Walz and J.D. Vance debate, you're going to see there's no love lost between those two.
Sir.
Let me know what you think so far of this rally. J.D. Vance's.
Well, if you build a 100-foot wall, you're going to have a lot fewer illegal aliens coming into this country, and it's obvious, and it worked when Donald Trump was president. Look, no one has ever said a wall keeps out 100% of illegal aliens, but if it keeps out 98%, I'd say we're doing pretty good. And that means less fentanyl, less drugs, and less crime coming into our communities. So I was at the border just a few days ago. It's a lot hotter down there in South Arizona than it is here in Philadelphia. And I remember seeing the slats of border wall just sitting on the ground. And why are they sitting on the ground instead of being constructed? Because Kamala Harris said you're not allowed to construct border wall anymore. That means more fentanyl in South Philly. That means more orphan children. That means more suffering Americans, and we can't let Kamala Harris forget it.
I haven't been to the border, so let me know if any of you guys have been to the border. Let me know how it is. If they're just like border wall just laying down on the ground, not being built. And from what I had heard before, that's what's happening. So how hard is it to take care of this border and build this wall, whether you're Democrat or Republican? I'm just keeping it honest.
Ma'am.
To congratulate him to say longer right after he was chosen as Vice President Harris.
Could you repeat the beginning of that? I missed the first one.
Earlier today, you said that you called Governor Walz, so clearly at least part of you believes that he could be the vice presidential candidate. Are you saying that you will not debate him, or will you agree to go on the debate stage with Tim Walz?
No, I absolutely want to debate Tim Walz, but I want to debate him actually after he's actually officially the nominee. And I did call him and congratulate him and offered him my best wishes. I think that's the polite thing to do. But look, would it shock me if the Democrats pulled another switcheroo? No, it wouldn't. So look, we're going to wait until they actually nominate Kamala Harris and Tim Walz before we do any debates. And then, of course, we want to have a robust debate again because we believe the American people have the right to have their political leaders try to persuade them. And that is what's so scandalous about Kamala Harris's basement campaign. 16 days she has been the presumptive nominee of the Democrat Party. 0 times she has sat for a real media interview.
And so it's interesting. So he's saying he could do a bait and switch where even though they have supposedly Tim Walz, that maybe they could go back to Mark Webb and kind of confuse everybody. Conspiracy theories? Question marks? Absolutely.
That's a disgrace. Nobody should ask to lead the American people unless she's willing to answer tough questions. And if she's too afraid of the American media, how is she possibly going to deal with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and a bunch of world leaders all over the globe? Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you now.
He is taking questions from the reporters. Hopefully not plants. Just keeping it honest.
Well, my message to voters who want to see less division, look, I want to see less division as well, but division starts at the top. And you saw Donald Trump, who took a bullet 2 weeks ago and called for national calm and unity. That is the kind of unifying message that we need in this country. But we're not going to have real unity in the United States of America when you have a border czar who's running as president of the United States who welcomed cartels and welcomed drugs into our communities. The division comes from bad leadership. We fix the bad leadership, and I think we have a great country from people from all political walks of life. Unity will come, but only after we get rid of the bad leadership. And you asked about the strategy. Look, the strategy is simple. We know that there are 6 or 7 states that are going to decide this election. We think that it is shameful that Kamala Harris is running from tough questions from the media. So I'm going to go to every single battleground state that I can. I'm going to answer tough questions. I'm going to talk to people because that is the minimum that you should do if you want to be the president or vice president of the United States of America. In the red, ma'am. And then behind you in the white shirt. Yeah.
Do you see him as an easier candidate?
Well, look, the only thing I'll say about Josh Shapiro is I genuinely...
And that's the one that we kind of thought that everybody was favoring was Josh Shapiro, even though I wanted Mark Webb. A lot of people thought Josh Shapiro was going to be the one, but it looks like this guy surprised everybody. Tim Walz, VP for Harris.
Some fans out here. I genuinely feel bad that for days, maybe even weeks, the guy actually had to run away from his Jewish heritage because of what the Democrats are saying about him. I think that's scandalous and disgraceful. Whatever you believe or whatever disagreements on policy you have about somebody, the fact that that race, the vice presidential race on the Democratic side, became so focused on his ethnicity, I think is absolutely disgraceful, and it's insulting to Americans, whatever background you're from.
And that much is true. Just because he was Jewish, people were hating on him. Come on, world. Come on, United States. We're supposed to be united.
But look, I'm not relieved or non-relieved about who Kamala Harris chose because, look, Kamala Harris is the problem. Kamala Harris was the border czar. Kamala Harris has had the policies that have caused so many people to needlessly suffer. We're going to run against Kamala Harris because she's the problem, and she's the one asking to be the people's president of the United States. Though I say she's not actually asking. She's given teleprompter speeches. She's given scripted remarks. She's not actually doing the bare minimum we should expect of a person who wants to be the people's president. Yeah.
The choice of Tim Walz, the argument that was made for him is that he will help Democrats in the Midwest with white working class voters, perhaps. Can you address that argument?
Look, I'm skeptical that whoever the VP nominee is, most people are voting at the top of the ticket. But here's the thing about Tim Walz. Look, Tim Walz is a guy who wants to take children away from their parents if the parents don't agree to do sex changes and the school wants to. That's crazy, right? A fundamental violation of parental rights. Tim Walz is a guy who wants to ship more and more American manufacturing jobs to China. He said it on camera in the name of the green energy scam. Well, if you care about the environment, and I certainly do, why are you going to ship American manufacturing jobs to the dirtiest economy in the world? Why wouldn't you keep them right here in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, in the places that really need it? This is a guy who, when rioters were burning down the biggest city in Minnesota, was actively cheering them on. You think the black business leaders in Minneapolis are grateful, the working class business leaders are grateful that Tim Walz allowed rioters to burn down their businesses? You think that people are grateful to have a guy who wants to ship manufacturing jobs off to China? There's no way the American people are going to buy it. It just doesn't make sense. And again, the biggest problem with the Tim Walz pick, it's not Tim Walz himself, it's what it says about Kamala Harris. That when given an opportunity, she will bend the knee to the most radical elements of her party. That's exactly what she did here. That's what she's going to keep on doing as president. That's why we got to elect Donald J. Trump, president of the United States.
So technically, is that an endorsement for Tim Walz? I wouldn't use that in an advertisement for Tim Walz.
And I'll take just a couple more here, and then we got to hit the road. Thank you all.
Senator, do you think you have any similarities with Walz? And you're both from the Midwest, and you work for
Can you start that again?
Yeah, do you think you have any similarities? And you can talk about like common ground that you share with Walz.
Well, look, I mean, yeah, we're white guys from the Midwest. I guess there are similarities there. But what's different is the actual ideas about how best to serve people, white, black, or anything else, in the Midwest and everywhere else.
I thought that part was funny that there are two white guys from the Midwest. I guess not funny because nobody tended to laugh, but that's who they are. One's younger, one's older though.
Right? I can't believe this is a guy who tries to claim that he stands for working people, and yet he wants to pursue energy policies that are going to ship everybody's job to China. In some ways, what Tim Walz represents is doubling down on failed 30 years of leadership in this country where we don't make enough of our own stuff. We don't use enough of our own workers to make enough of our own stuff. We rely on everybody else for energy instead of American citizens. And then we throw open the southern border to make our communities less livable and less safe. He is the double down choice for failed leadership. And again, Kamala Harris selected him. I don't know why, but I think it's because she's fundamentally a radical herself and she wanted a partner in crime. Ma'am.
Can we talk a bit about foreign policy?
Yeah, sorry.
Let's talk a little bit about foreign policy. Could you tell me how you handle the two largest conflicts in the world today, that being in Ukraine and also in Israel? Not so much what has been done wrong, but what you would do going forward.
Well, I think the most important thing you got to do is kick Kamala Harris the hell out of office, right? I mean, that's going to make the world a lot more safer and more secure. Look, in Israel, I think it's actually very simple. What we all want, meaning the Israelis and any American with an ounce of common sense, which I think is 99% of our country, we want the war to end. We want Hamas to be destroyed. And then we want the Israelis to be able to build a peace process with the Sunni Arab neighbors to build a counterbalance to Iran. That's it, right? It's very simple. Now, the problem is Kamala Harris, on the one hand, says that she really cares about civilian casualties. and really wants the war to end. And yet she refuses to give Israel the weapons that allow them to minimize civilian casualties and bring the war to a close end. It's the dumbest policy maybe in the history of American foreign policy to prolong this war, to promote the death of innocent civilians, and that is the Kamala Harris approach to the Middle East. Now, in Russia and Ukraine, I saw a report just a couple of days ago that the Ukrainians are running out of fighting men to actually staff the war. You've got to believe in peace, and you've got to bring peace to that region of the world. Russia would have never invaded Ukraine if Donald Trump was president. And now, thank you.
And then we also maybe not would have given Ukraine so much money. I'm just looking at it from the Republican side. And we could have used some of that money that we gave to Ukraine for America and a lot of the services that we need to impact our people.
And now we are where we are. And if you want to bring peace to that region, you need a negotiator who Vladimir Putin respects. Does anybody here, and obviously we're in a biased crowd, but does anybody here actually think that Vladimir Putin respects Kamala Harris? She's afraid of all of you. She sure as hell isn't going to be able to sit in an audience with Vladimir Putin and push for a reasonable peace. So we've got to have a person who understands diplomacy, who understands that America does have negotiating leverage, that shuts off energy in places, or shuts off access to energy in places where you have bad guys running the energy policy, rebuilds the American energy sector, allows us to project power overseas, and makes Vladimir Putin know that we got to bring peace, and you got to have respect for an American president who can do that. And then we'll do one more question. Well, look, it's ultimately President Trump's decision, but President Trump has shown again and again, as much as the media accused him of being a wild cowboy, President Trump believes in the power of diplomacy. Love a guy or hate a guy, disagree with a foreign leader or agree with him, you've got to be willing to engage in diplomacy. The Kamala Harris approach of saber rattling while the world goes to hell has clearly not worked. We've got a war in the Middle East. We've got a war in Europe. We've got threatened war in East Asia. Kamala Harris's approach has failed. Donald Trump's approach delivered world peace. I think I know who I'm supporting in 2024. One final question. Go ahead, ma'am.
What would you say to the millions of women that have been offended by your childless cat women comments? And also, do you have any plans for the 11 million of undocumented Hispanic people who have been paying taxes in the U.S. for decades?
Two good questions about the cat ladies and about what she just said, the second question. We're seeing this today. Here's J.D. Vance's response, as he looks like kind of like a cat right there.
Well, look, the plan with people who have come into the country illegally is you've got to be willing to deport some of them. I mean, this is not rocket science. If you have, look, if you've got 20 million illegal aliens in this country, not all of them are bad people. Most of them are probably very good people. But if you break the law to come into this country, you've got to be willing to send some of those people back. That's the Donald Trump approach. And if you don't do that, you don't have a real border. And the people who will suffer the most are the people right behind me who are going to continue to have their communities poisoned by the fentanyl that the Mexican drug cartels bring across that open border. Now, you asked about the remarks that I made that were, you said that they were offensive to millions of women. Well, here's what I'd say. Thank you, ma'am. I love you too. What I said is very simple. I think American families are good and government policy should be more pro-family. Now, if the media wants to get offended about a sarcastic remark I made before I even ran for the United States Senate, then the media is entitled to get offended. You know what I'm offended by? I'm offended that normal Americans can't afford grocery prices. I'm offended that Kamala Harris opened up the American southern border and allowed fentanyl to come into our communities. And I'm offended that she wants to be the people's president, but she won't even answer tough questions. That's what I'm offended by. And I think that's what most Americans are offended by too. And I guess on that note, I should say, thank you all for having me. It's great to be here. If I can ask you to just do one thing. We have got thank you. We have got an incredible amount of momentum. We've got an incredible amount of capacity to win this race, but it's going to require every single one of us doing everything we can. So our national motto is "In God We Trust." God tells us to hope and not despair. So let's get out there, let's work the phones, let's knock on the doors, let's get everybody out there to vote, and let's re-elect Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. I know I can count on you. God bless you guys. I love you. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Man, so the interesting part on that, I'm over here trying to get out of there. And the interesting part about that was this promoting Donald Trump and JD Vance, or was this promoting Mr. Walz? What do you think? You know, I kind of like how they did this. We're looking for Tim Walz. He is going to be supposedly the vice presidential candidate for maybe our president in some people's eyes. What do you think? What do you think of and we've done a lot in this show. I'm looking at some of my notes. So who is Tim Walz? Again, let me tell you. He has 2 children. He's 60 years old. He's married. His wife is Gwen Whipple. And he is the supposed candidate now for vice president. And what is going to be interesting is when he goes up, man, I tell you, when he goes up against JD Vance wants to debate him, but was it a slap when he said, well, you know what, they might do a switch and bait pretty much, and he may not be the person that I'm going to debate. Wow. So what do you think? Kamala Harris debating Donald Trump, JD Vance debating, and this should be an interesting one, Timothy Walz. And they're probably vice presidential candidates. They're probably going to have just one debate. I would have liked, my favorite one wasn't Josh Shapiro because he was like being pushed number 1 for a while. Mine was Mark Webb, Senator Mark Webb. He was an astronaut. Goodness sakes, he was an astronaut. Who doesn't like astronauts, as I've said? His wife was shot and almost died. Everybody loves Mark Webb. He's been able to talk to people from all sides of the spectrum, blacks, whites, rich, poor. Who doesn't, again, like astronauts? Okay, really. I'd vote for him. He was the last astronaut to be considered for president since John Glenn, who was from Ohio. So Mark Webb, he didn't get it, which I hated. Josh Shapiro, I thought it was too young. Mark Webb, I thought was the right age, a little bit older, more mature, able to talk to everybody. But now you have Timothy Walz. And then I wondered, too, if Mark Webb would have took a lot of criticism. Because who hates and who dislikes astronauts? He's been around the world. How many people can say that have run for office? He's been around the universe, okay? Just keeping it honest. So what did you think then? Was that smart for JD Vance to come on and talk about Timothy Walz like he did? And is Timothy Walz tonight, if he is the VP pick, going to do the same against Vance? Let's stay tuned for that. So you've been watching a live show. We keep it real. We keep it honest. We keep it simple. As we talked about the VP candidate, Tim Walz, and then also showed you a live presentation from JD Vance, a rally talking about Tim Walz. And if you notice, he wasn't giving commercials, okay, for Tim Walz. So you can email yours truly, parkerman2011@gmail.com, parkerman2011@gmail.com. You can leave me a voice message, 216-702-3718, 216-702-3718. Don't forget to hit the like and share button and subscribe as you continue to help us out as we build, you build. Go to our Patreon page. And that's a page kind of like PBS where we have 3 tiers. And it's whatever you want to contribute funds to keep us going. You know, we put a lot of work in some of our stuff, and not just some of our stuff, all of our stuff. So we thank you. Become even more part of our family. Invest more in part of our show. You have any Parker twists you'd like to see, you let us know. Stay tuned too today, later on. We're going to try to be at the live rally for Kamala Harris as she brings out her VP candidate. And then also we're going to be doing our Midnight at the Oasis. That's 12 at night. Famous song, Midnight at the Oasis. Look it up, where we talk about the things of the day and we talk about what's going on tomorrow. So I hope you enjoyed what you watched. Keep your head up, never look down, always believe in yourself, and therein will lie your answer. You have been watching the live show of Kamala Harris's maybe VP pick, Tim Walz, and also J.D. Vance's rally regarding who? Not just Kamala, but Tim Walz. Tell your friends. We don't just keep it simple. We don't just keep it honest. We keep it real. But in closing, keep it honest. I'm Anthony Parker. God bless.